Yeah.
I just unmuted the phone, so I'm just checking to see if folks who dialed in online can hear us okay. If you want to just send a little message through the chat room, that would be great.
Anyone.
Yeah. Bueller. There we go. Got a couple.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Call somebody out.
We can hear you.
All right. Well, we've got a good crowd on the phone. I have just a couple housekeeping items that I wanted to share. So we have been sending out the director's cut and the monthly production online. And so you can actually sign up through the website. If you go to dmr.nd.gov, visit the information center page, you can go in there and sign up to receive the director's cut as well as the production information in your inbox in your email. So if you'd like to receive it that way, you can go online and sign up. Just a reminder to turn off your cameras and mute your microphones. And next director's cut is September 14th, tentatively right now. So other than that, I think we'll go ahead and get started and hand it over to Lynn.
September 14th. There's an industrial commission meeting that day. Okay. Well, it's tentative. Thank you, Katie, and thank you for those who came to the webinar and also those who have logged in. We appreciate this opportunity to answer questions and provide some information on what's happening with our oil and gas industry. So industry in June, I call it tapping the brakes. They haven't really taken their foot off the accelerator, but they definitely tapped the brakes, and we saw about a 21,000 barrel a day decrease in production. Record number of wells producing, but they're restricting production from wells, and so oil production dropped about 2%. Gas production dropped a smaller amount, about 1%, 15 million a day. So that I don't forget, I want to mention that more than half of that oil production decrease was on Fort Berthold. And so as we talked about last month, industry is very tuned into gas capture. That is the most problematic area in terms of gas capture. And so as they scaled back production and tried to compensate, they really made an extra effort to compensate on Fort Berthold. 11,500 barrels a day decrease was on Fort Berthold. So what's behind the decrease? Number one is gas capture. We have been meeting with the midstream companies, and the new gas capture policy seems to be working very effectively. There is a ton of communication taking place between oil and gas operators and the gatherers and processors. Usually I hear that they have weekly communication, talking about their completion plans and their rig plans and their compressor capacities and plant capacities and what's going to be online and offline, where and when. So gas capture, number one. I think the second thing we need to remember is that June was quite rainy. And so when we talk about the weather, I think we had a half a dozen pretty significant precipitation events. 3 of those, at least 3 days, resulted in the 4 big counties shutting down traffic on the county roads. And so we had one operator, one significant operator, one of our either number 1 or number 2, that had 20,000 barrels a day shut in for 2 or 3 days as a result of the load restrictions from the wet roads. So we're subject to lots of things, but number 1, gas capture, number 2, weather. I think the other thing, as we look out a little bit further then, so you look at permitting. Permitting was way up in July. So again, industry's planning ahead. They're thinking about where are they going to drill during the winter. Let's get the permits in. Let's get the pads built or expanded so that we're not out there trying to do construction in November and December. Let's get our permits approved so that we can get things built in the August, September, October timeframe and not have to do winter construction. Very much has become a thoughtful business, a lot of planning going into everything. So we saw permitting increase by more than 50 permits from June to July. You saw the oil price drop from July. North Dakota Sweet was at $63. Today we're at $55. The market, and Justin can talk more about this, it seems to be very reactive to news. And so the market does not like the uncertainty over the tariffs and the Iran sanctions, and it doesn't like U.S. storage increasing during this season. That should not be happening. It should be a heavy driving season, and so the market is in a little bit of turmoil and pretty volatile these days. We saw the rig count drop by 8 from July to today. So what's going on there? Well, again, gas capture is really ruling the day. Industry at 66 rigs was outrunning gathering capacity. And they were actually outrunning or stretching the frac crew capacity. So that's the kind of the third element we have to bring into this. My survey indicates we've got 40 frac crews operating in the state. They are trying to hire and they would like to staff up, but 40 frac crews can service 67 drilling rigs. So they were actually accumulating non-completed wells with 40 frac crews running and 66 rigs running. The non-completed well count was not dropping at all. They were just barely keeping up with the drilling activity. So gas capture, weather, and frac crews really are what is causing industry to tap the brakes. When we look at non-completed wells, up 38 statewide, but if you look at them on Fort Berthold, they're actually up 75 within the boundaries of Fort Berthold. So outside of Fort Berthold, 37 non-completed wells were taken off the inventory, but inside the reservation boundaries, 75 were added. So again, we saw when there were 14 rigs previously operating within the boundaries of Fort Berthold, they were outrunning the frac crews, and we saw the non-completed well count rise. And again, that's the area where the greatest struggle with gas capture is taking place. It was nice to see the inactive well count come down, 111. So it appears that it's easier, and I had some conversations with job services. Companies are much more successful at hiring workover rig personnel, workover rig crews. That's sort of an entry-level position. Doesn't require much in terms of skill. Are you strong? Can you put on gloves and a green hard hat? Is kind of where you're at with that, as opposed to trying to hire on with a frac crew, where it's a lot more safety concerns and training that goes into that. So workover rigs are ramping up, and so we're seeing idle wells being put back in production. So we saw an increase of 3 drilling rigs on Fort Berthold, a decrease of 11,500 barrels a day production, an increase of 75 non-completed wells. Nothing really earth-shattering there, other than again, it factors into that whole business of workover or completion crews and gas capture. Last thing, as we get really to focus on gas capture, missed the target slightly again. The target is 85%. Statewide Bakken hit 84%. Everywhere it was 84, 85%, except on the trust lands within the Fort Berthold Reservation. And again, there's ongoing efforts to fix the right-of-way difficulties that are being experienced there, but we probably won't see the benefits of that until next year. One Oaks Grasslands plant was down for 16 days in June. We also had significant downtime at the Robinson Lake plant that Endeavor operates, and so that was backing up gas on the fee lands within Fort Berthold. And so those two situations, and Justin will be able to talk about this, but we really have more than a year of this to deal with. Until year-end 2019, we're not going to have any breathing room in terms of gathering and processing capacity. We're going to be running at or above what the gas plants can process. So this is going to be an ongoing topic, and you may get tired of hearing about it, but we'll keep talking about it anyway. So And then I think the last thing I wanted to mention a little bit on the federal level was that the Industrial Commission did submit comments on Senator Schumer's letter to PHMSA urging that they move quickly on crude by rail. Sandia Labs has an ongoing study, and our response was, we're participating in that. EERC is participating in it. Let the science play out, and then talk about rulemaking. Let's don't make it political rulemaking. Let's base it on science and on the facts. And then the torpedo pad, as you know, at Van Hook was challenged by the MHA Nation, and the BLM ruled that they could move ahead with the drilling and completion of those wells. Judge Hovland confirmed that, but there has been, in June, there was a lawsuit filed by the MHA Nation in U.S. District Court to get that decision overturned. So I have not heard of a hearing date for that yet. The completions are due to begin this month on torpedo. So they should be, within the next week or so, begin fracking those wells. They actually drilled 10 wells on that pad. 8 of them were challenged in this lawsuit. So with that, we'll take questions. But clearly, industry reading kind of the forward signals of gas capture, weather, and frac crews, they tapped the brakes a little bit and slowed things down from 66 rigs to 58, slowed production down, and trying to stay within those gas capture requirements.
Just to clarify then, these were industry decisions, nothing from the Industrial Commission or nothing from your office saying you have to ratchet back.
Yeah, so the question from the room was, did the Industrial Commission say you have to ratchet back? And no, that we didn't impose any production restrictions anywhere near this order of magnitude. I didn't have an opportunity to check with Caitlin, but I think a month ago we did have a couple of small operators that got production restrictions, but these were industry decisions based on the guidelines that they committed to, the goals, 85%, and their conversations with the midstream people. So that seems to be working very well. They are quite concerned about November 1 when we go to 88%. That is going to be an incredible challenge. So I think you see that reflected in their actions on reducing rig count and working in that direction.
Lynn, got a question. Marcus Wells, you were talking about the MHA and their lawsuit. What are they representing?
So the question from in the room is about the MHA lawsuit. What they're challenging the torpedo wells, the basis for that is that the wells are within 1,000 feet of Lake Sakakawea, and that potentially endangers their water supply and violates some regulations that they have about setbacks from the lake shore.
So what is the rule on setbacks?
The rule from the MHA Nation is half a mile setback, or go to the tribal council and request an exemption from that.
Well, I guess what puzzles me is, are they acting on behalf of tribal lands or individual lands?
Yes.
Because the tribe only represents in what they own. Individuals are represented by the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Yes. So the question was, are we talking tribal lands or individual lands? My understanding of the lands involved in the torpedo drilling unit and also where the torpedo well pad is located are either private or allotted lands. It is located physically on the fee land portion of the reservation, and the federal lands are allotted lands. They're under the Van Hook arm, and then there are private minerals under there as well. So, but again, the point of the suit is that it doesn't comply with the tribal regulation for the setback from
When
the
you say
lake shore.
torpedo runs, are you talking about the location or what drilling company is it?
The drilling company, question is the location or the drilling company. It's called the Torpedo Pad.
Okay.
That's not the name of the wells, but that's what it's called. It's at Van Hook, and the operator is Slauson
Okay.
Exploration.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
I have a follow-up question online. I'll just share. Just wondering about right-of-way issues and how is that still coming into play, maybe in production or gas capture, and anything to add specifically in Fort Berthold as well.
Okay, so right of way is a conversation in every single one of our meetings with the midstreamers. It has become much more difficult to obtain and much more expensive. So even outside of the federal lands, rights of way have become more difficult. The issue really, though, comes to head when you're dealing with tribal lands on Fort Berthold. That's where it's the most difficult, takes the longest. The timeline that was presented to us that showed that one of the gas gathering companies' most recent right-of-way took 455 days to get it approved, which is an enormous amount of time. And so there are conversations going on with the Department of Interior about what could be done in terms of writing rights of way so that they are more flexible into the future, and also on interpreting the existing rights of way. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs folks have taken the most conservative interpretation they could of current rights of way. A good example would be a gathering company said, we're going to lay 3 pipelines in this span of time. They only laid 2. So they came back to add the 3rd pipeline to increase capacity, and we're told, no, you're past the timeline. You have to do a new right-of-way. It's start over, 455 days, and we'll see what we get to the end of that. So those are the kinds of things that are being worked on is how might we interpret existing rights of way differently to make it easier to expand capacity, and then how should new rights of way be written in a way that they have that flexibility, that we aren't asking this question, how many pipes can I put in and when? So it is always going to be a longer process on the federal lands, but it shouldn't be 455 days long. There are a couple of places where that could be significantly impacted. Was that helpful?
Yeah, and a follow-up.
Sometimes I know way too many details. So,
Follow up on that. What is the average outside of federal lands?
oh, thank you.
In terms of writing?
So the question from the room is, what's the average for getting rights of way approved outside of the federal lands? And it's somewhere in the 6 to 9 month range. So, you know, it's still 180 to 270 days. But again, half or less of what it's been taking on the federal lands on Fort Berthold. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And again, it varies all over the place. Some of the midstreamers have their 2018 rights of way in place and ready to go, and they're currently trying to negotiate 2019 rights of way. Others not in such good a shape, and we're going to really struggle for the next year.
Shifting from right away, I've got another question from Luke Johnson related to road closures. Can you maybe explain just a little bit more in detail how those road closures impacted possibly this month's production? Okay, sure. So the big producing counties experienced unbelievable truck traffic in 2011, 2012, 2013. And it was impossible to maintain the county roads, the kind of damage that occurred with rig moves and those kind of things that took place. So they have put some pretty strict road restrictions in place where if there is a major snow or rain event, they have the option
of pretty much closing down all county roads to anything over 50,000 pounds. So what happened, particularly in McKenzie County, was the major rain event associated with the tornado that went through Watford City closed down countywide all the roads for 3 days. And so I only know the numbers for one operator, but one operator in particular who's very active in McKenzie County had to shut in 20,000 barrels of oil a day and shut it in for the whole time period. No pipeline connection. It extends to the right-of-way problem again. If you get the right-of-ways, you get the pipe in the ground and you're moving the oil through a pipeline, then this doesn't happen. But even with that, it would affect movement of frack water, it would affect movement of sand, all those things. There are some things that simply have to move by truck. And when we have an incident like that, again, maybe a little better planning. I think industry has been consulting with the county government to see if you couldn't break the county up into zones or areas and be a little more precise on where there was too much rain and where there wasn't, so that you had some, maybe you have a plan B where you could move the oil out by a different route. So I know there's some of those conversations going on. They are much more proactive in dealing with those things, but that's how it works. So major rain event, major weather event. I think July was kind of rainy too, so we might see one or two of these hiccups in July, and then August has been dry as a bone. So we're way past that. I've not heard of a case where it was too hot to frack a well. So sometimes it's too cold, but I've never heard of them giving anybody a break because it was too hot. So we'll see how that goes. But when you get a major rain event, the counties are very protective of that infrastructure they've built, and so they clamp down very quickly.
Andrew, go ahead.
Lynn, with we had the production record in May, and you said we did back off a little, but the permitting is way up. Are we going to set another record or two by the end of this year, you think? Or what do you, because you were saying there's going to be that increase, that influx in activity. Are we going to set that record here shortly, or what do you expect for that?
Yeah, so the question was, can we anticipate more production records, or are we stuck? And we really expect some additional production records to be set before the end of the year. We are going to see the end of this year's tiny bit of breathing room on gas processing capacity. So the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, there's going to be a little bit of breathing room in gas capacity, and we fully anticipate that they're going to fill that plus. So yeah, but when we get around to the Little Missouri 4 plant, and what's the other one coming on this year? Targa? That's Targa. Wild Basin 2. When those plants come on and give us some processing capacity room, we're going to see oil production spike. So yeah, we expect to set a couple more records for the end of the year. We had hoped that June would be another record breaker, but I think the combination of gas capture and weather got us. So.
Any other questions for Lynn? Amy, go ahead.
Can you comment on why there were no production restrictions as a result of flaring from April and May?
Sure. So the question from the room was why little or no production restrictions, and I'm not sure there were none. Have you checked with Caitlin to make sure there were none?
Katie said there were none.
Katie said there were none. Well, we're going to go with that then. I'm sure you got that from Caitlin.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the policy allows for a lot of different adjustments on an operator by operator basis. So an operator may be out of compliance in one area, but over comply in another area to offset that. That's usually the easiest way. Is that once we see that we have an operator who's not in compliance with the 85%, then we go and analyze county by county, and then within the counties that are not in compliance, we go field by field, and then we go down to the wells. And quite often what we find is the operators have planned ahead, and that they have flared the gas in an area where the wells are already producing less than the production restriction amounts of 200 barrels a day or 100 barrels a day, or they have implemented well site NGL recovery, which allows them to flare the gas, or they've utilized liquefied natural gas or compressed natural gas for rig fuel and frac fuel, and they're allowed an offset for that. So by the time you get down to a well by well basis, typically they have made the adjustments a couple months in advance to make sure that they restricted or adjusted production on their own terms and didn't end up with a state implemented production restriction. And that's why that flexibility was allowed, was so that the operators would adjust their production where and when it worked best for them and for their gas gatherers, rather than have us come in not knowing the details about which well should do what and implement it. And what we've seen too, it's been interesting talking to the midstream companies, great deal of interest in LNG and CNG for rig fuel and for electric generation and for frac fleets, and particularly in the winter for heating frac fluids. So that's something we really wanted to see, was to move industry away from diesel fuel to cleaner fuels. So that's why we offered that incentive. I think the other thing that we are seeing when we implemented the stranded gas option, we have seen rigs move out of the core area now to drill in southern Dunn County and in Billings and out in western and northwestern Williams County. So that's been effective, but that's going to drive the gross flaring numbers up. Although the people are allowed an exemption for 1 year for flaring that stranded gas. So we're kind of driving industry activity where we want it to go, but we're also allowing a lot of flexibility there. So that's how it ends up. They make the choices. They're watching their gas production on a daily basis and making choices to avoid industrial commission imposed production restrictions.
At what point will they have to do the improvement plans if they continue to fall below the 85?
I believe it is after 6 months, but it might be 3 months. I can't remember exactly. If an operator fails to make the 85, it's either for 3 months or 6 months. Then they're going to have to start meeting and presenting gas capture improvement plans. I'm a little hazy on that. We don't have any companies that are there yet, but with not making the goal in May and now in June, we could have some companies hit that trigger in July.
So then what would happen when that goes up to 88% in November? Are we going to be looking then at widespread non-compliance in the state then, or?
I think we're going to be looking at a significant amount of non-compliance, operator by operator. I don't know that I would characterize it as widespread, but we're likely to see several people having to file gas capture improvement plans. On the other hand, they're counting on those two plants coming on in November. I mean, they are just staking their future on it. And so they may get the relief in November that they need that avoids that collision with the 88% capture.
Any other questions for Lynn?
Just a clarification, you mentioned CNG. What is CNG?
Yeah, compressed natural gas. So there's two ways to move natural gas to a well site. One way is to liquefy it and move it like you would propane. Another way is to compress it to very high pressures, 2,500, 3,000 PSI, and move it in tube trailers. And different companies have different preferences there, but either way, you're able to take something that would have been flared or would have put additional pressure on our transmission pipelines and use it to replace diesel fuel as a fuel. So we think that's something we ought to be incentivizing, and that's why we built it into the gas capture policy.
Thanks.
And while Justin's getting set up, Amy, I did look it up really quickly. The improvement plan meetings, it's 3 or more of the most recent 6 months.
Oh.
So, and that's as of that
So-
April. So
with missing the 85% capture in May, and now again in June, we could have some companies hit that with the July production.
So if they miss it in April, May, June.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if they missed it in April, May, and June, I don't know if anybody did. We made the statewide. Pardon me. We made the statewide goal in April, right? I think May and June production were the only ones that so far that have been below. But
But if it's.
but there are
individual-
companies. But it's company by
Individual
company. It's not. Yeah, it's not as a whole. So.
Okay, thank you.
There, no, I checked it out. I know whose it is. I'm surprised they haven't missed it yet.
You're ready?
Oh, no, I can't go to it. All right.
Good. All right, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. I will get right into some of the typical reporting each month. So again, looking region-wide at what's taking place, Eastern Montana, South Dakota, continued production slides in those regions as well. As of today, 0 rigs operating in either of those 2 states. So no expectation in the near term of any type of growth in those particular states. Again, they do produce crude oil and natural gas into the same transportation system as North Dakota, so that's why we keep an eye on what's taking place in those neighboring regions. Just a quick month-to-month comparison of oil production, month-over-month changes, as well as natural gas in red, month-over-month changes. Again, decreases in both. On the crude oil side, that was the largest decrease since the December 2016. If anybody remembers that month, the blizzards, back-to-back, several storms. So we'll continue to watch this. I think Lynn covered very well what to expect going forward. But again, I think that overall the trend going forward for the rest of this year, even if there's some minor ups and downs, that the upward trend will continue. When we look at how transportation was taking place in the month of June, we did see some very slight changes. Some more market share moving on to the rail network and off of the pipeline network, and we'll talk in a moment about the market conditions that are supporting those shipping decisions. Again, slide 5 is that historic look. So throughout 2018, we've continued to see market share increasing on the rail network and decreasing market share on the pipeline network. I've got another slide here in a moment that'll talk about that Brent WTI spread. So slide 6. We did see throughout much of the early portion of 2018 very strong growth in that Brent WTI spread. So, many of you have heard me speak about this in the past. My rough rule of thumb is that when the Brent WTI spread is above $5 or $6, that historically the industry appears to trend towards moving additional barrels on the rail network. So again, those are barrels that are not physically committed to a pipeline or a rail facility. And so we did see throughout much of 2018 that Brent WTI spread higher than the $5 to $6. At the end of June and into early July, we saw that spread collapse, and it has been creeping up again as we've moved into mid-August now. So when we look at physical barrels estimated to be moving by rail car, again, some additional growth in that arena, somewhere between that 250 to 280,000 barrels per day estimated to be moving on rail car out of the region. Where those barrels are headed, again, east and west coast, but you'll see in a moment another slide. The marketplace currently, the latest information available is showing higher market prices on the west coast, and then some of the EIA estimates as far as market share between the east and west coast is also supporting that. Slide 9 is just that updated what the individual refining complexes were paying for their refiner acquisition cost of crude oil. And you'll notice the highest priced area, just over $74, was on that PAD 5, the west coast of the US, followed by the east coast and the Gulf Coast. Again, PAD 1 on the east, PAD 5 on the west coast. We do not have any type of pipeline access to those regions, so the only way to get crude there is by rail car. And then where prices sit today, just under $6 spread between that Brent WTI markets. Again, that's really that gray area where not a real strong market incentive, but for some shippers that may still be an option they'll continue to pursue in this type of price environment. And as promised about a year or so ago, just an update on what's taking place with discounts in North Dakota. So the first 13 months post Dakota Access being in service, that average discount in North Dakota is $4.77. That's down from $7.71, which was the 2016 weighted average. So just under a $3 price improvement over the last 13 months. And you can see the numbers here of the potential impact then to state tax revenues. When we look at truck traffic north and south of the border, continued growth on the imports, so barrels coming in North Dakota being reported to the U.S. International Trade Commission, and then holding fairly steady on the exports. So again, those barrels being traded north and south of the border. Try and keep an accounting on these as well because of that balance of transportation out of the region. Again, not a lot of color as far as exactly what companies and what marketing strategies are being used in these scenarios. But again, it is definitely something to keep an eye on. And I do not have any type of forecast going forward for what this may look like if we're going to continue to see these higher volumes being imported, or, as you can see historically, very strong ebbs and flows with the marketplace. Now switching gears to the natural gas, as Lynn alluded to, statewide, 17% flaring, 83% capture. We did see a 1% increase in that blue piece of the pie. That is flaring from wells that do not have a pipeline connection, and a 1% decrease in that orange portion, which is flaring from wells that are connected to a pipeline system. And so again, fairly consistent month to month statewide, but just that very small, subtle change between where those volumes were being flared and what some of the reasoning behind it, excuse me, was. Some good news on the gas connections. For the last several months, we've been keeping an eye on how quickly wells are getting connected to gas gathering systems statewide, and whether or not the midstream companies were keeping pace with completion operations. And so in June, it appears that that black line is back higher. So new wells getting connected to gas gathering was higher, or outpacing the well completion activity in the state, which is good news. We'd like to see that at least keeping pace or staying above the drilling activity. And so Lynn made several comments earlier about gas plant capacity and what that looks like. So over the last number of months, I've been continuing to use this graphic, and there is one change. Was another plant in the last month that was publicly announced. That was the Roosevelt expansion, which added the total new plants to 6. So there's going to be 2 plants coming online later this year. The Badlands plant, which the latest I've seen is over 80% complete as far as construction, and the Oasis Wild Basin facility, which is over 90% complete as of the last numbers that I've seen. So those 2 plants in 2018 scheduled to come online. I'm estimating September, October type time frame. Going to add 400 million cubic feet of gas processing per day. Total investment for those 2 facilities was $300 million. And then the additional 4 plants will bring that total for all 6 to 965 million additional cubic feet per day of processing capacity, for a total investment of $1.3 billion between those 6 plants over the next 2 years. But as you can see in this graphic, again, the peach colored portion is current processing plant capacity. The gray line up to the point where the red and gray separate from each other, that is current gas production. Gas production has exceeded processing plant capacity, and so that is one of the major reasons for some of the challenges North Dakota's been seeing on gas capture. And so when we look at those 2 new plants coming online later this year that will provide relief. However, it may be temporary until we see those additional 4 plants come online late in 2019. When we take a look longer term on slide 17 again, these 6 plants will not be the end of investment for gas processing in the region. We should continue to expect to see many additional investments over the next 5, 10, 15 plus years as this play continues to mature. One other update, I just wanted to get these out because I know that there may be interest in it. The 2017 numbers for pipeline construction and miles is now complete. So for the year of 2017, just under 1,000 new miles of pipeline added in the region. So that takes the total of pipeline miles for crude oil, natural gas, produced water, now over 27,350 miles of pipeline operating in the state. And so you can see again, year over year, up slightly from 2016, but both 2016 and 2017 were far below the activity levels that the industry had been working at from the previous 5 years. When we look at where that activity was taking place, again, the top tier of this graphic is gathering pipelines, and then separated in blue is produced water, green is crude oil gathering, and red is natural gas gathering. And then the bottom tier is transmission miles that were added by year, again using that green for petroleum or crude oil, and then red being the natural gas sector. So many of those 484 miles added in 2017 would be part of that Dakota Access pipeline system for the transmission side, and then pretty universally split between the 3 gathering commodities, oil, water, and gas. And then how that compares with kind of our rules of thumb and kind of our guidelines of what to be expected. So when we look on the bottom tier of well completions that took place in 2016 and 2017, and then the top tier of this graphic is pipeline miles being added, kind of the old rule of thumb that folks use is between 1 and 1.5 miles of new pipeline per well completion. And when the 2017 numbers came in, it was very much in line. So almost a 1-for-1, 1 new mile per well completion in the state. So nothing really unexpected or out of the ordinary for the industry pace, given the activity levels in 2017. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions at all.
Do those miles refer to installed in 2017 or in service in 2017?
I believe they're reported as in service in that year. Yeah.
Even though 2 new gas pipeline or 2 new gas processing plants going online, do you know of any planned outages of existing plants?
Nothing that I've seen. So the question was any planned outages. So as Lynn mentioned, July, there was an unexpected outage in one of the state line facilities, had a fire taking place. It did coincide very closely to some planned outage that they had during that time. So there was some type of coordination and planning, at least from the operator's standpoint, but nothing else on the table that I can speak off the top of my head.
Can you repeat the capacity for the 2 gas plants that are being added?
Yep. So the 2 plants being added this year in 2018 would total 400 million cubic feet of additional gas processing.
So what does that bring the total to? No,
Off the top of my head, I don't. I have a table on my website for anyone. I can shoot you an email too, Dave. But the total processing plant capacity is on the website. It's under gas plants on NorthDakotaPipelines.com. Yep.
Are you aware of any impacts that steel tariffs maybe have had on build out of any midstream gathering processing facilities, whether it's the tariff or being tight on domestic supply?
I have not heard that. So it's not that my day-to-day activity, I'm typically not in direct communications with the procurement and some of those agencies or divisions of the pipeline companies. So as of right now, I've not heard any direct positive, negatives associated with that. So don't have a whole lot to provide on that.
With the 2 plants that are coming online, is there sufficient pipeline capacity to get the gas to the plants?
So the question was, so adding processing plant capacity, is there going to be enough gathering capacity to get all of the gas molecules to that facility. In a perfect world, there would be. So the companies, obviously, when they're making that investment in the plant, there's also additional investments going in for pipe in the ground, new compression, and any other associated facilities to make sure that gas can get in and gas can get out. That said, likely just with how the nature of the industry, there may be construction constraints in one area or another. But ideally, when those plants come online, everything associated with bringing product in and moving product out should also be coming online at that same time.
Any other questions in the room? I do have another follow-up question just related to right-of-way delays. Are there any communications or actions that the state or others have been looking at to bring more awareness to MHA on the pipeline right-of-ways, maybe how they've been impacting production and gas capture?
I have not been part of any of those conversations, so not to say that those aren't taking place with other agencies or other individuals, but me personally, I'm not taking place. Okay, well, thank you very much.